Right now on Law and Crime Report, quick thinking captured on body camera videos. A little girl found floating in a pool, not breathing.
Come on.
Good girl, good girl.
Hear from two of the officers credited with saving the 3-year-old's life. Plus, why one former officer in the George Floyd case is asking for charges against him to be dismissed. And police radio transmissions from the night Breonna Taylor was killed must be handed over to her family. What those recordings might say.
And so I just returned fire. I got 4 rounds off. And it was like simultaneous. It's boom, 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 boom.
Later, the nation reflects as civil rights hero John Lewis is laid to rest. Law and Crime Report, diving into today's true crime and top legal stories. It's Thursday, July 30th, 2020. All right, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. This is the Law and Crime Report. My name is Bob Bianchi. It is July 30th, 2020. Listen, with all the news out there about police officers, you've heard me say it as a former prosecutor and now as a criminal defense attorney, let's not forget about all the good things that so many of the officers do each and every day that go underreported. Such a case out of Pensacola, Florida, where a 3-year-old girl was drowning at her grandparents' pool. The grandparents called 911. Officers responded. When they did, she was not breathing and she was blue. And due to their quick actions, saved the child. Let's take a look.
Got it. Move,
Move.
Please hurry! Please hurry! Oh my God! Please hurry! Oh! Oh my God! Oh my God! No! Oh my God!
Follow these voice instructions.
Please!
Oh, she's moving.
Please! Oh Jesus Christ! Jesus Christ!
Did you get a pulse?
Huh?
Did you get any pulse?
Please!
I think I got a pulse.
Okay.
Get her on her side.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
She's moving. Tell them we got a pulse.
185, we got a pulse. Come on.
Please, God!
Hey guys, can y'all do me a favor? Whenever EMS comes out, can y'all wave them in here?
Watch for EMS. It's slowly coming back, yeah. She was definitely blue when we got here. Still see her fingers.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I can tell, I've tried to do a finger sweep multiple times.
I'm not getting anything, just, there we go.
Hey, there you go.
There we go, come on.
Good girl.
Is she got pulse?
Yes, she does.
54 report.
Come on, baby.
Just sit tight.
54.
Is she got a pulse?
Any other
She does.
patrol unit not on scene, stay tonight. 10-4.
There we go.
Good girl.
Come on.
Still good.
101. I'm still
Got a pulse.
away.
It's strong. The pulse is strong.
Thank you.
That child will fully recover after having been in the hospital. I have with me Mike Wood from the Pensacola Police Department, Public Information Officer. Thank you so much for joining us on this heroism of saving this 3-year-old child.
You know, that's exactly what Officer Skipper and Officer Lindblom are. They are heroes. They saved the day there in this little girl, and I regret that they were not available for this interview. But, you know, this is, like you said in your open, this is something that happens literally every day to police officers across the country. And we're glad we were able to get this out. We're glad that it had a happy ending, and she is going to make a full recovery.
You know, Officer Wood, I want to talk a little bit from my EMT experiences that I had for many years as an emergency medical technician. And I can tell you firsthand, there is nothing more dramatic and pulse gyrating, if you will, than a child, especially a choking child or having to perform CPR. You could hear it in the officers' voices with the panting and the way their voices were, the nerves, but they kept themselves calm, cool, collected, follow the training. Talk to us about what is it like when you go on one of these calls and hearing people screaming in the background, the poor grandmother thinking that they, you know, took care of their child's kid, their grandchild, and they're just emotionally distraught as well. How much do you have to keep yourself emotionally prepared to keep going forward?
Well, this is one of those calls, as you would know, that nobody wants to ever go on. That a child that's in danger of losing their life, and you have a job to do. You have to stay focused because there's nobody else there that's going to help. It's all on you. So you have to stay focused. You have to rely on your training. You cannot waste 1 second, and that's what these two officers were able to do.
Yeah, and it's funny, and from my experience too, there's an aftermath to it as well. And I remember looking at the interviews of the two police officers, both of whom have young children, one of whom was very emotional when speaking to the media about it. It's that delayed response. You got to be calm, cool, collected while you're there, and then afterwards it kind of kicks in emotionally, no?
That's exactly right. You know, you sit in your cruiser and you got to gather your thoughts because you have to answer the next call and you have to be equally as effective on that next call. So it's tough to do. Sometimes we don't fully decompress until we get home that night. But these officers are trained professionals. They've been doing it a while. Like you said, they also have kids. So the parental instinct also kicks in. So we're glad that this turned out the way that it did. And we're thankful for that.
Right. Anything with respect to the grandparents, I have to ask with regard to an investigation. And I will tell you, again, from my experience when I became the county prosecutor in charge of a prosecutor's office, when there were these fatalities where kids drowned unless there was some extraordinary negligence or recklessness. And I know my viewpoint didn't apply across the board. Prosecutors saw this differently, but I felt like those people had suffered enough with the death, again, unless there was something involved like alcohol or drugs or something significant like that. Are these grandparents facing any kind of investigation like that?
Absolutely not. This was a total accident. There was no negligence on their part. People that are not used to having toddlers around, sometimes this happens. And the grandparents did, in fact, look for her quickly. That's why she was found as quickly as she was.
Right. And from what I understand from the medical reports, the doctor said literally could have been seconds to a minute later, and that child would not have recovered. Is that what your investigation is revealing as well?
Yeah, that's correct. The attending pediatrician at the emergency room said that if the officers hadn't arrived when they did, well, let me back up. If the grandparents hadn't called 911 as quickly as they did, and then the arrival of the officers, that this young girl would not have survived.
Right. So what about the officers? What kind of reception are they getting from the community and the police department after an incident like this?
They're getting a lot of positive feedback. You know, thanks to social media, a lot of people are able to give us their thoughts, give those officers their thoughts. It's been 100% positive, and they're in a good place right now. And we're thankful for the support we have, not only in the community, but since this went national, we're getting support nationwide, and we thank them for that.
Let me ask you, given what's going on in the country and the protests and many of the police reforms that you see in many other jurisdictions, how has Pensacola fared with regard to that backdrop prior to this, heroic event?
Well, we had demonstrations in Pensacola. They were peaceful. Over the years, we've had things like this come and go, but the Pensacola community has backed its police department for many years. And even through this horrible situation that we saw play out on the national news, our community came together. They had peaceful protests, and that's where it stands in Pensacola.
Right. So I would assume that this would improve community relations rather than exacerbate those problems. Curious, are your officers trained EMTs? Because I was watching how the officer was performing his actions. He certainly was trained. In my jurisdiction, typically they waited for the EMTs to come before they were actually starting to do medical procedures. What goes on there in Pensacola?
The officers are not trained EMTs, but they are trained on the use of the AED, the defibrillator. And Pensacola is surrounded on three sides by water, so our officers are prepared for water rescues as well as rescue breathing and CPR.
And how many events do you know offhand are your police officers involved in each year, or whatever statistic you can give me, that are medical emergency related things where they've actually saved people's lives by being there?
I can tell you that happens on a weekly basis here. We are dispatched to what's called a code. That is someone whose heart has stopped or breathing has stopped. The Pensacola Police Department is dispatched along with the fire department and EMS. And more times than not, the police officer is the first on the scene. So he has to be able to react and know what to do. And our officers are trained to do that.
Okay, officer, thank you so much. I wish I had more time to discuss it. Your congratulations, at least from my end of the world, and I'm sure most right-minded thinking people realize of the great work that many police officers, not just in Pensacola, but around the country do. Even though there's need for reform, there's also great work that you do, and this is a great example of it. Please give our regards at the Law and Crime Network to the officers. Congratulations. And next time I'm in Pensacola, like I told you, I go there every now and again, I'll look you guys up.
Hey, do that and stay hydrated while you're here.
Okay, I will. Thank you. All right, guys, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Law and Crime Report. All right, welcome back. George Floyd is back in the news, the case at least. The former officer Thao files a motion to dismiss the charges that have been filed against him by the district attorney, saying they were not supported by probable cause. We're going to have a video of the incident where Thao is accused of standing guard. Now, I've talked about this a couple of times about, and I know people maybe get upset about this, but these are criminal defendants at this point in time, and each one are doing different things. And we're going to do a deep dive. I got some great guests, but let's take a look at the video of Thao at the scene.
Bro, he doesn't have it, bro. He's not moving.
No, did they kill him, bro?
Bro,
They
bro,
didn't kill him
what
or
is you,
something.
1087, bro? You're a
Oh
bum,
my
bro. Or
God, bro.
987, bro? You're a bum.
is just
First thing
alive.
you want to grab is your mace because you scared, bro. Scared of fucking minorities, you fucking bum, bro.
3 minutes off him.
Like, bro, 3 minutes, bro. He's not moving. Bro, he's not even moving. Get off of his fucking neck, bro. Get off of his neck.
Still on him, bro.
Yes, look at that,
Back on
bro.
the street.
Are you serious? Bro, are you serious? And you gonna keep your thing on your neck? Yeah, bro. Bro, I barely touched me like that, dude. I swear I slapped the fuck out of both of y'all.
I didn't want to call the ambulance.
Bro, he's just gonna let him keep his hand on his neck, bro? You're a bro. Tou, you gonna let him keep that like that? You gonna let him kill that man in front of you, bro? Huh?
Like what?
Bro, he's not even moving right now, bro. He's not even moving out.
This is what it is. We gotta deal with this shit.
Bro,
They're not gonna help us, bro.
Right. He black. They don't care.
987 years
If it ain't they people, they don't care, bro.
All right, so there's Officer Tou. Now, he is charged. He's fired from the department. I got some great guests to talk about this. The great Julie Rendelman, former assistant district attorney in New York and now criminal defense attorney, and Lakai Vinson, who is a litigation attorney based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Julie seems a little frozen, but hopefully we can hear her. Julie, can you make out what I'm saying? Okay, I guess Julie's frozen, so we're going to go to Lakai first. Lakai, the basis of this motion is that Tou is being charged with aiding and abetting. And I've looked at that statute of what aiding and abetting is, and I would like you to talk to our audience about the idea. Like, look, no one is saying this is not a tragedy, but now these 4 officers are criminal defendants in a case entitled to the presumption of innocence, proof beyond the reasonable doubt, a jury of 12. They don't have to testify against themselves, all the rights that every other defendant is entitled to. But you can be sure, and I've said it before, and sure enough, it's appearing in the motion, Lakai, where the defense attorneys are saying in order to show aiding and abetting, you have to show both actus reus, we call it in the law, and mens rea, which is a fancy way of saying that there was an action and that there was a mental state. Most crimes require a mental state of, in this particular instance for aiding and abetting, intentional conduct. So to assist in the actual crime itself. As a defense person or a litigation attorney, what would your thoughts be when you were either if you're a prosecutor looking at this case or a defense attorney about how that applies to the Tou case and its motion?
So certainly the defense has to argue that Tou does not have the criminal intent. They would not be doing their due diligence if they did not do so. So I understand why they filed the motion. Do I think that the motion is going to withstand and the judge is going to rule in their favor? Absolutely not. I think that it's obvious that Tou was there. He was standing in front of George Floyd. He was making sure that no one was able to interfere with the activity that was being done or the crime that was being committed against George Floyd, which ultimately culminated in his death. And so I think in terms of questioning whether or not the mens rea is there, it's obvious. The act in which Tou was doing, it wasn't by accident or mistake, but it was intentional. He had the intent to assist or aid and abet with the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, well, let me push back on that just a little bit, because we know mere presence at the scene of a crime is not enough. And to aid and abet, as you aptly put out, you have to share the intent to some extent. And I'm just using the euphemistic language. I know Julie had the actual statute, which I was really looking forward to having it read literally. And you have to want that result, for lack of a better expression. Keeping the crowd back is what he was ordered to do. Is the suggestion that had Tou not kept the crowd back, the crowd would have ran over to Chauvin and ripped him off George Floyd? But moreover, how could it be that he would understand that Chauvin is trying to commit a murder? How is he sharing in that purpose? Is the suggestion going to be that that's what Tou himself wanted as well? Number one, sorry for the long question. Number two, I do agree with you that this motion is likely to be dismissed because the standard at this stage of a proceeding is giving all legitimate inferences to the government when you're evaluating, which is a much lower standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt between 12 jurors. I think he's got an arguable case before this jury. Chauvin is going nowhere. I think Tou does. If you feel to comment on anything I've said.
Yeah, so let's step back for a moment. You talked about whether or not we can presume intent based on the fact that he's standing in front of this crowd and he's blocking them. Well, I think it's enough to get to a jury. I do not believe a judge is going to agree with the defense that his case should be dismissed, because I think it is a question that a jury should answer. So certainly, given the circumstances, Tou was standing there. He was told many times by the crowd that George Floyd was not breathing, that what they were doing was wrong. He was not resisting. So he was made aware of all the facts and circumstances. It's not as though he was standing there, he was unaware, he wasn't actively involved. He was an active participant, not by mistake, but by his own doing, regardless of whether or not the order came from a superior or not. So he participated for all intents and purposes. So I certainly think that because of that fact, a judge will not agree with the defense's motion and allow him to be dismissed or allow these charges to be dismissed.
No,
a great argument that a defense should make, but I don't think it's one that's so overcome with the judge.
No, and I agree with you. And why lawyers are doing it at this stage is it presents appellate issues down the road. It gets them more information. It gets them a hearing potentially. So it's definitely a motion that has to be made. I agree it will be denied. But I think these will be the very arguments you will hear at trial. And then again, that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt against Officer Tou. Now, Tou, we also have Ben Crump, who's the attorney for the victim's family, who is calling the officer's actions and use of force a quote-unquote deliberate indifference. Let's take a listen.
He's saying that he cannot breathe long before he was on the ground. And two, there seems to be a couple of efforts by Officer Lane in this case to express some concern and help him breathe. Does that change anything?
Well, as Attorney Ramanujan and Attorney Stewart just articulated, it's this deliberate indifference. Even with him saying, I can't breathe, they still put him face down, had him handcuffed. He was clearly restrained. As Attorney Jeff Storms litigated in the David Smith case, this was nothing new for the city of Minneapolis. It was, in fact, foreseeable that if they didn't address this issue, what happened to George Floyd or somebody like George Floyd was predictable. And so these officers who were all trained as first responders, who were all trained to be able to de-escalate situations, what we see on the body cam video and what we hear on the body cam video tells us the policies and procedures that they in fact followed, despite what they're going to try to tell us in court that they trained them to do. And that's what this lawsuit is about, as my co-counsel so ably articulated. It really is about trying to change the culture and the behavior of policing. you know, we would have hoped that George Floyd did not have to sacrifice his life to bring about these changes.
And I'm told we have Rendelman unfrozen. Julie, welcome back. Listen, what Mr. Crump is doing, and just so our audience is clear about this, he's only representing the victim's family with respect to a civil suit that's filed. And it's typically filed under a federal statute 42 U.S.C. 1983. That's where it says the government can't deprive yourself of your liberty. I used to love handling those cases because a little small person can take the government into a courtroom and hold them accountable. Maybe not get justice, but they got a shot at justice. When he's using the words deliberate indifference and talking about the custom practices and policies of the police agency, he's speaking right out of the case law and the statute itself in order to show and establish that this is a civil rights violation, which is separate from and independent from, obviously, the criminal prosecution. Thoughts?
Well, yes, I have to go back because, you know, being frozen in time made it difficult for me to respond to one of the things. So I have to just talk about it very briefly with regards to the charges against Tou, if you don't mind. And that is one of the unique things about the law in this specific state is when it comes to intent, it's not written in the statute. And so there's case law that explains what intent this specific defendant would have needed in order to be aiding and abetting another individual. And in this case specifically, he would have known that the alleged accomplice was going to commit a crime, and the defendant, being Tou, intended his presence or actions to further the commission of that crime. That is the problem with that specific charge is you have to actually, based on the case law, prove beyond a reasonable doubt at trial that he intended that his actions that he knew beforehand, in a sense, because the word knew, he alleged, indicates some level of knowledge at the time it's happening. And that, to me, is the problem, at least with that specific charge with this defendant.
And I agree with you completely. And is in essence what I was saying to Lakai. If I were and was a homicide prosecutor, let me put it in terms like that because people get agitated if you're on one side or the other. And this file came across my desk with respect to Chauvin. That's shooting fish in a barrel, as far as I'm concerned. No brainer. When I get to Tou, as a prosecutor, I'm nervous for the very reasons you just stated there. The bar is high with respect to proving that beyond the reasonable doubt. And that's where I'm going to focus most of my attention. Factually, am I able to do that? That concerns me as a prosecutor, whether I'm going to be able to go over the goal line based upon the very law you read. Let me just jump back to Mr. Crump real quick. And I really appreciate you because I knew you had that law, and we had discussed it a little bit about last night, so it was important law, because what people, I want to go back to, it's not what you feel, and it's not what you think, and it's not what you hope for. The judge tells you when you're sworn in and before you can even get on a jury, you must follow the law. And a lot of people are looking at a really terrible incident, and even with respect to Tou not doing something and saying he's wrong for not having interceded. But that is, the law requires much more than that. And it's not just for Officer Tou. I always worry about the unintended consequences, the slippery slope for all of the other defendants that are being tried right now, that they be tried based upon the law as it exists. You don't like the law, you change the law. But that's the law the prosecutors are left with. With respect to Mr. Crump, Julie, how long are these news conferences going to be allowed to occur? I think he's an excellent lawyer. He certainly knows the law. He had a great way of explaining complex law very simply, but it has the capacity of influencing the outcome of the criminal case and even the civil case. In Jersey, these things just aren't allowed. How long is this going to play out in the court of public opinion?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. And not only does it cause some issues, it confuses a potential jury in a criminal matter when we start talking about civil matters, because we know the standard is different and the laws are different. And so when we have someone who obviously rightfully wants to speak out in defense of George Floyd and his family, it is difficult when they start discussing the law, because potential jurors are listening to that. But I don't see any end in sight, at least when it comes to this case.
Yeah, and Julie, the perfect example of that was what happened in the OJ case. He was found not guilty in the criminal case, yet was found responsible in the civil case because the burdens are much different. The discovery is different. It's an easier standard of proof. So there is a lot that can occur with regard to confusion. And I'm surprised the lawyers and the judges are not jumping in to try to stop it on both sides. That shouldn't occur. So anyway, we got to take a quick break here at the Law and Crime Network. It's great to see that Julie is unfrozen. When we come back, we'll see whether she's frozen, whether she's not, with more Law and Crime Report. Welcome back to Law and Crime Report. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm your host. The Breonna Taylor family struck a home run with regard to a motion that they made. There's a civil case that's been filed on her behalf, and they petitioned a judge to get the radio traffic or radio transmissions that were occurring on the night of the incident. As many of you may know, these things would have typically been very, very difficult for people to get, which I have often opined as a former civil rights attorney, makes your job as a lawyer very, very difficult when you can't get crucial information. One, to make sure it's not destroyed or altered, and two, in order to properly assess and investigate your own case, because Breonna Taylor's lawyers have a right to do their own investigation. Well, this lawsuit firing Detective Brett Hankinson after he fired 10 rounds into Breonna Taylor's apartment. Let's listen to some of the interviews that are being released as well, which, again, is something that you rarely got prior to these reform movements. This is of Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly of the Louisville Metro Police Department describing the incident.
At that point, Lieutenant Hoover said, go ahead and hit it. So I looked at Mike and said, go ahead. So he hits the first time, and it hits right on the door handle and didn't move the door. And every time he hits, people are announcing, please search warrant, please search warrant. Second time he hits the good spot, and it almost knocks the door open. I could see the deadbolt at an angle, and I could see a crack in the door leading into the apartment. So I said, this one's going to go. So he hit the third time, and as soon as he hit the door, came open, they're yelling, please search warrant, please search warrant. I go to around the corner. I clear the living room on the right-hand side where you can see the sliding glass door. As I turned the corner, as soon as I cleared the threshold of the front door, I could see down the hallway. Your mind works so quick in this situation, it's unreal. Because as soon as I cleared it, I'm face on about probably 20 feet away, right down the hallway. There's a bedroom door on the right, and there's the male and a female. The male's closest to the door, so it's to my right. And as I turn the doorway, he's in a stretched out position with his hands with a gun. And as soon as I clear, he fires. Boom. And it was almost like at the shooting range where two things flip at the same time, and you got to shoot, no shoot. But I mean, they were like shoulder to shoulder. My mind's going, this ain't right. You know, something's off here. Because all the doors I've made entry in, I've never seen this. And so I hit this corner, and it goes boom. And as soon as the shot hit, I could feel the heat in my leg. And so I just returned fire. I got 4 rounds off. And it was like simultaneous. It's boom, 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 boom. And then I went back and went down on the side of the door and then reached around. And I think I got 2 more off around the corner of the door. And then I could really feel the blood in my leg. So I reached down and felt it, and my hand was full of blood. And I knew it had hit my femoral at that point.
Okay, so that was an officer who was actually shot, returned fire. He later says that he pulled himself back out. Other officers helped him out, and as you know, ultimately, the boyfriend who shot that officer survived, but Breonna Taylor regrettably died. Lakai, let me go to you on this particular aspect of this case. The cops have not yet made a decision, or prosecutors at this point in time, as to what they're going to do. An officer is being fired upon. There's training. I've gone through the training, is that you shoot at or in the direction of where those shots are coming from. What are your thoughts about how he spoke, and whether or not you believe there's going to be charges brought against him, at least, the officer who got shot?
Well, Bob, I agree with you. This one is certainly a hard one, and it's certainly a tragedy. Whether or not I think charges are going to be brought against this particular officer, which I believe is Officer Mattingly, I think there is a lot of public pressure to do so. I think that early on, I may have said, yes, I certainly think that charges will be brought against him. But with the time that has passed and the process that has moved forward slowly throughout this whole ordeal, I don't necessarily think that charges are going to be brought against him. And I think if they decide to do so, which I'm reluctant to say they will, I think it is difficult to say whether or not those charges will stick, because the question is whether or not he defended himself after he was being fired at. So I think there's certainly some factual questions that will have to be answered and that cause some concern before we can really call heads or tails on this one.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. Julie, as a former prosecutor and now criminal defense attorney, I've had police-related fatality shootings that were pretty clear. I've had them caught on body cams and MVRs, and still took my time to dot I's, cross T's, cross-reference, send autopsy results to other independent agencies, toxicology reports to other agencies. But as Lakai points out, this is a very complex situation. Typically, the environment is difficult to prosecute police officers. I can tell you that firsthand. That may be changing as time goes by. But to Lakai's point, there are a lot of facts we don't know about. But this was an officer that was shot, which in my mind, can you get 12 jurors as a prosecutor? 12. That's what you need. You play to one juror. Can you get 12 to convict him based on what you heard in that interview?
Well, remember, it's not just about his interview, and I'm not taking a position at this in saying that as to whether or not anyone should be charged, but it's his interview coupled with every other piece of evidence. And just like in the George Floyd case, you have to distinguish each specific officer in making a determination as whether or not there's enough evidence against each of them. One of the points you made earlier, and one of the points Lakai made, is we talk a lot about public pressure, and public pressure changes the law, right? But the law is the law. And so we have to make sure when we're making a decision, especially something as serious as this, when it comes to charging an individual, that we're following the law and not doing it based on public pressure. As you said earlier, if you want the law changed, change it. But, there are serious issues with regards to whether or not they have a strong enough case, certainly against this specific officer, at least in finding him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, they're all excellent points by both of you. The boyfriend has been speaking out. He was initially charged. Charges have been dropped against him. Let's take a listen.
So it's a loud boom at the door. First thing she said was, "Who is it?" No response. So we like, what the heck? We both get up, start putting on clothes. Another knock at the door. She's like, "Who is it?" Loud at the top of her lungs. No response. So I'm like, what the heck? So then I grab my gun, which is legal, like I'm licensed to carry everything. I've never even fired my gun outside of a range. I'm scared to death. So she says that there's another knock at the door. She's yelling at the top of her lungs, and I am too at this point. Who is it? No answer, no response, no anything. So we like, what the heck? We both just see what I have on. Grab the nearest thing. These aren't even mine. These are hers. So we both are just putting on something to go answer the door and see who's knocking at the door. It's late at night. So when we come out, when we get out of the bed or whatever, walking towards the door, the door comes off the hinges. So I just let off one shot. I still can't see who it is or anything. So now the door's flying open. I let off one shot, and then all of a sudden there's a whole lot of shots. And we both just dropped to the ground, and the gun fell right over there. And I kicked it because I'm scared to death. Now we're seeing lights and stuff. So it's looking okay, it's the police, and there's a lot of yelling and stuff. So there's just shooting, we're both on the ground, and then when all the shots stop, I'm panicking. She's right there on the ground, bleeding, and yeah.
So that was the boyfriend's interview with police. Lakai, something that is of interesting note to me, and as a trial lawyer, we look at every single fact, and we look at it from our position, then we look at it from the adversary's. That's why lawyers are nuts. We look at about if we were adversaries, what we would be saying, and then we go back to ourselves and how we would counteract that argument. But this was a no-knock warrant. That's true. There was an issue in the beginning as to whether or not the police identified themselves and did knock or not knock. Now, in the interview that you just saw before, it was a very lengthy interview. The officers were saying that we decided, even though it was a no-knock warrant, that we were going to knock and announce our presence, it being the police, because they didn't think the boyfriend that was there. They just thought it was Brianna that was there. And I note from the interview he gave from the police, he mentioned on a couple of occasions that there was knocking at the door, which would support what the officers were saying. Now, he says that he didn't hear that they were identifying himself as the police, but that is going to be a fact that I'm sure the officers are bringing up strongly to the police and prosecutors that are investigating the case, that they didn't have to do any kind of announcement, any kind of knock. They could have just busted in, but they went step back and did the knock. What do you think?
So I think it certainly helps the officers that they have the boyfriend saying that he heard a knock at the door. The question is whether or not the knock was the officers actually knocking on the door, or was it them trying to force themselves into the door. So like Julie stated, we're going to have to look at all of the evidence. Unfortunately, we don't have any video cam where we can see exactly what happened, but there have been interviews of the neighbors that question whether or not they heard the officers announce themselves. Likewise, the boyfriend and what his position is as to whether or not he heard the officers announce themselves, although he did identify a knock. So there's certainly going to have to be a look at the totality of the evidence to see if it supports the officers' position about what they did and whether or not they indeed took a step back before they invaded Breonna Taylor's home.
Yeah, Julie, you know, I just was never a fan of these no knocks or entries in the middle of the night, for the very reason that if it were to happen to any one of us and we were startled, I'll tell you what, if somebody were doing that in my home, there'd be a weapon out. And if they came up there and I didn't know who they were, there'd be a problem. You have the right to be able to protect your home. Julie, if you can, based on your experience as a prosecutor, why isn't it that we can't execute these search warrants when the surveillance shows that there's nobody inside the home, and you can do it hopefully without any kind of interaction like this? These things are so dangerous. I've been in the briefings when they're going through how to do tactical entries. They're dangerous by definition.
So I agree with you. I think you have to keep in mind, let's talk about what the reasons are for the no-knock warrant. The reasons are usually when you have sometimes a dangerous individual that you can't track down, so you know they're in the home. That might be a scenario where you don't want to warn them, or where you know drugs are in the house, and so you don't want to give them a chance to either throw them out the window or flush them down the toilet. I think, you know, when we talk just specifically about the Breonna Taylor case, you know, we do have to distinguish with the fact is whether or not they announced themselves, whether or not they knocked. The law in terms of no knock meant that they didn't have to do any of those things. And so that's the number one issue in this case, because that seems to be the biggest problem. And so if that's the problem, then that's the part that needs to be fixed. Obviously, there were tons of mistakes along the way, and eventually they'll have to decide whether or not those mistakes were criminal. But it begins with the no knock warrant. And that's not on the police that got there. That's on the way the law works in that state.
Yeah, again, excellent points by both of you. And I will note, in fairness, I did at least see one or two interviews of people that lived in that area that said that they did not hear the police announcing that they were coming in there. So those are facts that are going to have to be fleshed out. And again, if the prosecutor is going to be charges, they got to be able to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. Excellent commentary, guys. Listen, we got to take a quick break, but when we come back, the legendary civil rights hero John Lewis, we'll talk about him. Welcome back. I'm your host, Bob Bianchi. The immortal life of John Lewis, congressman, from the days back in the day, having been beaten, fractured skulls, arrested over 40 times in order to advance the civil rights movement, catapulted himself into the Congress and gave a signal to his brother, a little thumbs up when he was being sworn in. And the brother said afterwards, "Why'd you give me that?" And he goes, "Boy, we've come far from our parents who were sharecroppers," right? And there he was in the United States Congress, had a prolific career. And he also received the Medal of Honor in 2011. Let's take a listen to what he said.
This is a long way from growing up in rural Alabama, from the sit-ins, the Freedom Rides, the March on Washington, the march from Selma to Montgomery. In my younger life, when I was growing up, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. And then coming here the first time in 1963 to meet with President Kennedy and to come back and to be honored by the first African-American president. It's amazing, it's unbelievable. I was deeply inspired and moved by the action of Rosa Parks in 1955 when I was 15 years old in the 10th grade. And later I heard the words of Dr. King on the radio. Seemed like he was saying to me, John Lewis, you too can do something. And I would ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But Dr. King inspired me to get in trouble. And I would never forget, after the sit-ins and during the Freedom Rides and during the campaign of President John F. Kennedy, listen to him. He inspired me. And later meeting his brother, Robert Kennedy, inspired me to continue to push. You have to believe in yourself and have faith in your fellow man or woman and have this abiding faith that there are things that are so right, so good, so necessary that you're willing to die for. Be not afraid.
The great late Congressman. Lakai, let me go to you first. I'm interested in each of your points of view of all of the amazing work and the amazing man he was. Very inspirational to me in his entire career. What's the one thing in your mind that you took away most, that was most powerful to you about the man's life and his career?
It's certainly hard to parse it down to one thing, Bob, but he was so brave and so courageous. He participated at 23 years of age in marching with Martin Luther King. He was willing to sacrifice himself, which he mentioned, which is outstanding. And he taught love and hope over fear and hate. And all of us can certainly take something from that.
Well said. How about you, Julie?
Just, you know, there was, at his funeral, he had written something, and he wrote that he wanted the following to be read, along with much other. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. He was one of those individuals that worked to bring both sides together, and didn't just work to help, you know, blacks and browns. He worked to help against anti-Semitism. And for whatever reason, I'm incredibly emotional. I think about my mother, who adored him and Martin Luther King. And so it's quite sad.
Yeah, you know, in my mind, he was the living example of the humility and love for people that many faiths espouse, but unfortunately many of the followers don't necessarily follow. That he had gone through everything that he had gone through, the physical pain, the mental and emotional abuse, the jailings, and he didn't get jaded. He didn't become nasty. He actually used his example of peace and love to change the lives of so many other people. And to me, he was truly, like they say in the scriptures, a job well done, faithful servant to me. Guys, is there a replacement for John Lewis? I don't mean literally. Who's the next John Lewis in Congress that can bring some hope to us that we can come together again as a country? Julie?
You know, I'm sure there's a young man out there, or woman, who can never take his place, but at least present the ideals that he did, and get people to listen.
Lakai, what are your thoughts in 35 seconds as to who is that person? And will his message that Julie read as he was dying, will it be heeded? Is this a pivotal moment in our history?
I think absolutely. There are certainly people that are in Congress right now that can resonate with John Lewis's spirit and speak up to what he believed in. I don't think that there's any one individual, and we don't need any one individual. We need a multitude of leaders right now. And we certainly hope that his spirit and his thoughts and awareness of what we needed to move America forward will certainly be pushed by those who are in office right now.
You know, I kind of look at it, guys, like John Lewis kind of embarrassed people, not meaning to be. He is the reflection of what I'm sure many people wanted to be, but just can't bring themselves to be there because of partisanship. So God bless John Lewis for everything that he did. And we hope that there's another John Lewis and a lot more John Lewises. I'm done for now. I'll be back next Monday. Have a great weekend.